We thought exploring an abandoned infirmary would be a spooky adventure, but what we found was a descent into pure dread. Tucked away, we uncovered the chilling Patient Zero rules, a set of protocols so sinister they were designed not for a human, but for something truly monstrous. This place still feels alive, and its forgotten guidelines seem to be following us. The Hollowbrook Infirmary sits at the end of a road that most maps have forgotten. Nestled deep in the Pennsylvania woods, about 40 miles outside of Scranton, it waits like a crooked tooth in a dying mouth. The building has been abandoned since 1987, left to rot after what the county records blandly describe as a catastrophic containment failure. Nobody talks about what that means. Nobody wants to remember. My name is Daniel Webb, and I lead a small team of urban explorers who specialize in documenting forgotten places. We had heard whispers about Hollowbrook for years, the kind of stories that get passed around campfires and basement gatherings. Stories about screaming that echoes through empty halls. Stories about lights that flicker in windows where no electricity has run for decades. Stories about explorers who went in and never came back out. We dismissed most of it as folklore. That was our first mistake. There were 4 of us that October night. Elena Vasquez handled our cameras and documentation. She had a sharp eye and an even sharper instinct for when something felt wrong. Theo Hartwell was our researcher, a former history major who could dig up information on any building, any tragedy, any cover-up. And Jenna Morrison rounded out our team as our technical specialist, handling everything from radio communications to thermal imaging equipment. We arrived just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. The infirmary loomed before us, a 3-story Victorian structure with Gothic revival elements that made it look less like a place of healing and more like a monument to suffering. The windows were dark, many of them shattered, and the front doors hung open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. "It's bigger than I expected," Elena murmured, already lifting her camera. Theo consulted his notes. Originally built in 1892 as a tuberculosis sanatorium, transitioned to a general infirmary in the 1940s. Then, starting in 1971, it became a specialized facility for what the documents call exceptional patient care. Whatever that means. I should have paid more attention to the way he said those words. Exceptional patient care. The phrase would haunt me for the rest of my life. We entered through the front doors, our flashlights cutting through decades of accumulated darkness. The smell hit us first. Rot, mold, and something else beneath it. Something chemical and sharp, like formaldehyde, mixed with something I could not identify. The reception area was a disaster of overturned furniture, scattered papers, and medical equipment that had been left to decay where it fell. "Looks like they left in a hurry," Jenna observed, sweeping her light across the chaos. She was right. There was no order to the abandonment. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents spilled across the floor. A wheelchair lay on its side near the stairs. One was still slowly spinning in a draft that came from nowhere. And on the walls, someone had written words in what looked like dried blood, though I told myself it was just rust-colored paint. "Do not wake it." The words were repeated in different sizes, in different handwritings, covering entire sections of the wall. Some were neat and precise. Others were frantic scrawls that trailed off into nothing. "Okay," Elena said, her voice unnaturally steady. "That's unsettling." We pressed deeper into the building, documenting everything we found. The first floor held the expected features of an old medical facility. Examination rooms, a pharmacy with bottles still lining the shelves, and a cafeteria where trays of food had petrified into unrecognizable masses. But it was on the second floor that things began to change. The architecture shifted. The hallways became narrower, the ceilings lower. The doors were reinforced with metal plating, and many of them featured multiple locks, not just on the outside, but on the inside as well. Small observation windows had been installed, but they were covered with metal shutters welded into place. What kind of patients needed this level of containment? Jenna asked, running her hand along one of the reinforced doors. Theo shook his head. I couldn't find any records of this wing in my research. According to the county, the second and third floors were just standard patient wards. That was when Elena found the file. She had been photographing a nurse's station when her light caught something wedged beneath an overturned desk. A manila folder, thick with documents, sealed with red tape that had faded to a dull pink. The label on the front was typed in capital letters that had yellowed with age. Patient 0, Level 5 protocols. Authorized personnel only. Level 5. Elena frowned. What does that mean? I took the folder from her hands, and the moment I touched it, something changed. The air grew heavier. The temperature, already cool, dropped several degrees. And somewhere deep in the building, I could have sworn I heard a door slam. We gathered around as I opened the folder, our flashlights creating a pool of light in the oppressive darkness. The first page was a cover sheet with basic information, or what should have been basic information. Every line had been heavily redacted except for 2 entries. Designation, Patient 0. Status, contained. The second page made my blood run cold. It was a list of rules. Not medical protocols or treatment guidelines, but rules. Instruction for the staff who worked in this wing. They were numbered, typed in that same faded ink. And as I read them aloud, I felt the weight of something terrible pressing down on us. Rule 1. Patient 0 is never to be addressed by any name other than its designated number. Do not acknowledge claims of identity. Do not engage with requests for its real name. Rule 2. The observation window must remain covered at all times except during scheduled monitoring periods. Patient 0 will attempt to make eye contact. Direct eye contact must be avoided under all circumstances. Rule 3. If patient 0 begins speaking in Latin, evacuate the immediate area and seal the corridor. Do not attempt translation. Do not listen to the words. Rule 4. Patient 0's feeding schedule must be maintained precisely. Delays of more than 15 minutes have resulted in containment breaches and staff casualties. Rule 5. The temperature in patient 0's containment chamber must remain below 50 degrees Fahrenheit at all times. Elevation above this threshold accelerates its metabolism and increases aggression. There were more rules, many more, but I stopped reading. My hand was shaking too badly to continue. What is this? Jenna's voice was barely a whisper. Some kind of psychiatric patient, Theo offered, but even he did not sound convinced. I flipped through more pages, finding incident reports, observation logs, and something that looked like an autopsy protocol. But autopsies are performed on the dead, and the document explicitly stated that termination of patient 0 remains impossible through conventional means. That was the moment I realized we were not just exploring an abandoned infirmary. We were standing in the ruins of a prison designed not to keep people in, but to keep something contained. Something that, according to these documents, could not die. We should leave, I said. Elena grabbed my arm. Danny, wait. Look at this. She pointed to a page I'd skipped. It was a schematic, a floor plan of the second level. At the center of the building, marked in red ink, was a room labeled primary containment, and scrawled in the margin, in handwriting that was rushed and desperate, were the words, God help U.S., IT got out. October 14th, 1987. I checked my phone. The date stared back at me with cold indifference. October 14th, 2024. Exactly 37 years to the day. That was when every light in the building flickered on. Not our flashlights. The actual overhead lights, buzzing to life with a sickly yellow glow that should have been impossible in a building with no power. And from somewhere below us, rising through the floor like a wave of ice water, came a sound. It was a voice, low, guttural, and wrong in a way that made my bones ache. You found my file. The words were not spoken. They were felt, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through every cell in my body. And beneath them, like a current of pure malice, was something that might have been laughter. "Who's there?" Theo called out, his voice cracking. The lights flickered again, and in that strobe-like illumination, I saw something at the end of the hallway. A figure, pale and impossibly thin, standing in a doorway that had not been open a moment ago. Its head was tilted at an angle that no human neck should allow, and it was smiling. The figure vanished in the next flicker, but the temperature continued to drop. Our breath plumed in the air. Frost began to form on the reinforced doors. "Run," I said, and we did. We made it to the stairwell before realizing that running would not be enough. The building would not let us leave that easily. Whatever we had awakened, whatever Patient Zero truly was, it had been waiting for someone to find its file. And now that we had, the rules applied to us too. We huddled in what had once been a supply closet on the first floor, our backs against shelves of decaying bandages and rusted surgical tools. The door was flimsy, wooden, warped with age, but it was all we had. Elena was shaking so badly that she could barely hold her camera. Jenna kept checking her equipment, desperately trying to find a signal that would let us call for help. Theo had the Patient Zero file clutched to his chest like a shield, his knuckles white against the yellowed paper. I could still see the figure in my mind, the impossible angle of its neck, the smile that was too wide, too knowing. Whatever lived in this building had been waiting for us. Not just waiting, watching. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Read the rest of the rules." Theo looked at me like I had suggested we walk back into the darkness and introduce ourselves. "Danny, maybe we should just... We can't leave until we know what we're facing. Those rules exist for a reason. If they kept the staff alive, maybe they can keep us alive too." He hesitated, then opened a folder with trembling hands. The pages rustled in the silence, and somewhere in the building, a door creaked open, then closed, then opened again, in a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. Theo began reading. Rule 6. Patient Zero will attempt to establish rapport with staff members. It will learn your name. It will learn your fears. It will use both against you. Do not share personal information under any circumstances. Rule 7. If you hear footsteps behind you in the eastern corridor, do not turn around. Continue walking at a normal pace until you reach the nurse's station. Patient Zero cannot follow past the threshold if you do not acknowledge its presence. Rule 8. The crying of a child is not real. Patient Zero is not a child. Do not investigate. Do not respond to pleas for help. Rule 9. The chapel on the first floor has been sanctified. In the event of a containment breach, the chapel is the only safe location. However, Patient Zero will attempt to prevent access to this area. Multiple evacuation routes have been established. Rule 10. Under no circumstances should any staff member remain in the building after 3 a.m. Patient Zero's activity peaks between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. During this window, containment cannot be guaranteed. Theo stopped reading. His face had gone pale in the dim light of our flashlights. "What time is it?" Elena asked. I checked my phone. The screen showed 2:47 a.m. We had 13 minutes. "The chapel," I said. "We need to find the chapel now." We slipped out of the supply closet, moving as quietly as we could through the ruined first floor. The overhead lights had died again, leaving us in darkness broken only by our flashlight beams. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the ancient floorboards sounded like a warning. The file included a basic floor plan, and according to Theo's frantic interpretation, the chapel was located at the western end of the building. We moved through the cafeteria, past the pharmacy, through a hallway lined with patient rooms whose doors had been torn from their hinges. And everywhere we looked, we found evidence of what Patient Zero could do. One room still bore the stains of old violence, dark splatters on the walls, claw marks gouged into the plaster. Another contained a bed frame that had been twisted into an impossible shape, metal bent like it was made of paper. In a third, we found photographs scattered across the floor, staff photos, patients, administrators. Every face had been scratched out with such force that the paper had torn. This thing hated them, Jenna whispered. It hated all of them. But it was the isolation wing that truly showed us what we were dealing with. The wing was separated from the rest of the building by a set of massive doors, vault-like, reinforced with steel plates and multiple locking mechanisms. The locks had been destroyed from the inside, the metal warped outward as if something had exploded through them. Scorch marks surrounded the frame, and the walls beyond were covered in symbols I did not recognize. "What are those?" Elena asked, pointing to the symbols with her camera. Theo moved closer, examining them with his flashlight. "They're not any language I recognize. Some of them look almost like alchemical symbols, but twisted. Wrong." He traced one with his finger. A circle bisected by a crooked line, surrounded by characters that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. "Wait, there's more writing here. Latin, I think. Despite Rule 3's explicit warning." He translated the words aloud. "Non mortis, sed dormiens, in aeternum vigilamus." "Not dead, but sleeping," he murmured. "We watch for eternity." The temperature dropped so fast that my lungs burned with the cold. Ice crystals formed on the walls around us, spreading outward from the symbols like frost on a winter window. And from deep within the isolation wing, we heard again. That voice. "You read my words." It was closer now, somewhere in the darkness beyond the ruined doors. The voice had a quality to it that was hard to describe, layered, as if multiple people were speaking in unison, but not quite synchronized. "You speak my language." Theo dropped his flashlight. It clattered to the floor and died, plunging that section of the hallway into shadow. "Run," I said again, and this time, we did not hesitate. We found the chapel almost by accident, stumbling through a doorway that should have led to a storage area, but instead opened into a small, preserved sanctuary. Unlike the rest of the building, the chapel was untouched by decay. Wooden pews still stood in neat rows, facing a simple altar and a stained glass window that depicted not religious imagery, but something else entirely. A figure surrounded by flames, reaching upward toward a light that seemed to recede from its grasp. The moment we crossed the threshold, the cold vanished. The air became warm, almost uncomfortably so, and the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on us since we found the file finally lifted. "It can't come in here," Elena breathed. The rule was right. It actually can't come in here. We collapsed into the pews, gasping, our hearts pounding so hard that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. But I knew we were not safe. Not really. The chapel was a temporary refuge, nothing more, because outside, in the darkness of the hallway, I could hear it pacing, back and forth, back and forth. The footsteps were wrong, too heavy, too slow, accompanied by a sound that was almost like dragging. Something wet, something that left a trail I did not want to see. Theo had managed to hold on to the file, and now he sat in a pew near the altar, reading through the remaining documents with an intensity born of terror. I joined him, forcing myself to focus on the words rather than the sounds from outside. "There's more here," he said. "Observation logs from the staff. They documented everything. Every interaction, every incident, every rule violation." He handed me a sheaf of pages, and I began to read. The entries were clinical, detached, written in the measured language of medical professionals who have been trained to observe without emotion. But beneath that veneer, I could sense their fear growing with each passing week. October 3rd, 1971. Patient 0 admitted to specialized containment following transfer from redacted facility. Initial assessment indicates extreme sensitivity to light and temperature. Subject displays unusual physical characteristics that require further study. October 10th, 1971. Patient 0 has begun vocalizing. Initial vocalizations were incoherent, but subject has demonstrated rapid acquisition of English language skills. Staff advised to limit verbal interaction. October 24th, 1971. First rule violation by staff member. Orderly Thompson made direct eye contact with patient 0 during feeding. Thompson found deceased in his quarters 3 hours later. Cause of death: massive cardiac arrest. No previous heart conditions on record. November 8th, 1971. Patient 0 has begun requesting its real name. Subject claims the designation is incorrect and insists that staff address it properly. All requests to be denied per established protocol. November 15th, 1971. Patient 0 spoke Latin for the first time during evening observation. Staff members present reported hearing voices in their heads for the following 72 hours. 2 nurses have requested transfer. 1 has been admitted to the psychiatric ward. The entries continued, growing more disturbing with each page. Patient 0 learned the names of every staff member in the facility. It knew their fears before they spoke them. It predicted deaths with unsettling accuracy. And slowly, inevitably, it began to exert control over the building itself. "Listen to this one," Theo said, his voice hollow. December 1st, 1985. Infrastructure failures continue. Electrical systems malfunction despite multiple repairs. Temperature regulation becoming increasingly difficult. Maintenance reports finding organic material in the walls. Dr. Brennan has authorized installation of additional containment measures, but concerns are mounting. Patient 0 appears to be integrating with the building itself. Integrating with the building, I repeated. What does that even mean? Before Theo could answer, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. 3 a.m. The footsteps in the hallway stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Complete silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere above us, from the second floor, from the third floor, from everywhere at once, came a sound that made my soul want to leave my body. It was a scream, but not just one scream. Hundreds of them, overlapping, echoing, building into a crescendo of agony that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The voices of everyone who had ever died in this place, crying out in unison. And beneath them all, low and steady, was that familiar voice. The hour has come. The stained glass window above the altar began to crack. The cracks spread across the stained glass like spider webs. And for a terrible moment, I thought the chapel's protection would fail. But the window held, the fractures stopping just short of shattering. Frozen in place, as if some invisible force had caught them mid-collapse. The screaming continued for exactly 4 minutes. I know because I watched my phone's clock the entire time, unable to do anything else, my body locked in place by a terror so complete that I forgot how to breathe. When the sounds finally died away, fading like echoes in a canyon, the silence that followed was somehow worse. We sat in that chapel for hours, none of us willing to move, none of us willing to break the fragile sense of safety that the sanctified space provided. It was not until the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the damaged window that we finally spoke. "We need to understand what this thing is," Elena said, her voice raw. "Not just what it can do, but what it is, where it came from." I agreed. The file contained more documents, pages we had not yet read in our panic to reach safety. If we were going to survive long enough to escape this place, we needed to know exactly what we were facing. The next section of the file was different from the clinical observation logs. These pages were older, handwritten in ink that had faded to a rusty brown. They appeared to be personal journals, belonging to someone named Dr. Harold Brennan, the same Brennan mentioned in the later records. Theo began reading aloud, his voice barely above a whisper in the chapel's heavy air. July 14th, 1971. I have been approached by representatives from an organization that declines to identify itself. They are transferring a patient to our facility, a patient that requires specialized containment. The payment they offer is substantial. Against my better judgment, I have agreed. July 28th, 1971. The patient arrived last night, transported in a container I can only describe as a coffin made of lead. The representatives provided minimal information, referring to the subject only as Patient Zero, and insisting that this designation never be changed. They handed me a set of rules, protocols for containment and interaction. When I asked why such extreme measures were necessary, they simply said, "You will understand soon enough." August 3rd, 1971. I have seen it. The entry stopped there. The next page was dated almost a week later. August 10th, 1971. I apologize for the gap in entries. I have spent the past several days trying to process what I witnessed. Patient Zero is not a human being. I do not know what it is. Its body appears humanoid, but the proportions are wrong. Limbs too long, joints that bend in directions they should not. Its skin has a waxy quality, almost translucent, and beneath it I could see something moving. Veins, perhaps, or something else entirely. August 15th, 1971. It spoke to me today. It knew my name. It knew my wife's name. It knew about my daughter's illness. Information that I have never shared with anyone at this facility. When I asked how it obtained this knowledge, it smiled. That smile will haunt me until the day I die. September 2nd, 1971. The rules are not arbitrary. I understand that now. Every protocol, every restriction, every precaution exists because someone died learning what happens when they are violated. The organization provided us with the rules, but they did not tell us what created them. They did not tell us about the blood that was spilled in Patient Zero's previous facilities. The journal entries continued, documenting Dr. Brennan's growing horror as he came to understand the nature of the thing in his care. Patient Zero was not sick. It was not insane. It was something ancient, something that had existed long before the infirmary, long before the town, perhaps long before human civilization itself. And it was intelligent, horrifically, devastatingly intelligent. October 1st, 1972. Patient Zero has been with us for over a year now. The rules have kept us safe, for the most part. We have lost 4 staff members to rule violations, but the containment holds. What troubles me is that Patient Zero seems almost content. It follows the protocols. It accepts the restrictions. It waits. But waiting for what? I looked up from the journal. It was biding its time. It let them think they were in control. Theo nodded grimly. Keep reading. It gets worse. November 15th, 1980. Strange things have been happening in the building. Doors open and close on their own. The temperature fluctuates wildly despite our efforts to maintain control. Patients in other wings report hearing voices at night. Voices that call their names, that know their secrets. I've begun to suspect that Patient Zero's influence extends beyond its containment cell. March 3rd, 1983. I found something in the walls during renovations. Organic material, tissue, blood vessels, nerve fibers, woven into the very structure of the building. When I touched it, I felt Patient Zero's presence in my mind. It knows everything that happens here. It feels every footstep, hears every conversation. We are not containing it. It is containing us. June 8th, 1985. The walls are getting thicker. That was the last entry in the journal. The remaining pages were blank except for one, dated October 14th, 1987, the day of the containment breach. The handwriting on this page was frantic, barely legible. It knows we are leaving. It knows we are trying to shut down the facility. It has been playing along all these years, letting us think we were in control, but we were never in control. The rules only work because it allows them to work. And now, The entry ended mid-sentence. A dark stain covered the rest of the page. God, Jenna breathed. They never stood a chance. I set down the journal and looked around the chapel. In a growing light, I could see details I had missed during the night. Scratches on the floor near the door, as if someone had been dragged out against their will. A dark handprint on one of the pews, fingers splayed in desperate supplication. And above us, in the corner where the wall met the ceiling, something that made my stomach lurch. A thin strand of tissue, almost like a blood vessel, running along the corner and disappearing into the plaster. Patient zero was in the walls. It was in the building. It was everywhere. The chapel is sanctified, I said slowly, but it's still part of the structure. It might be able to hear us, see us. Elena's eyes widened. Then why hasn't it? A soft knock interrupted her. We all froze. The knock came again, gentle, almost polite, from the chapel door. I know you are in there. The voice was different now. Softer, almost human, almost kind. You have read my file. You know what I am. But do you know why I am here? None of us answered. We barely breathed. I was not always this. Once I was like you, flesh and blood and hope. But they made me into this. The ones who came before. They broke me and reshaped me and locked me away. For centuries, I have been prisoner to their rules. The door creaked, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. I do not want to hurt you. I want me free. Help me, and I will let you leave. That is all I ask. Theo looked at me, his expression torn. What if it's telling the truth? It's not, I said. Rule 6. It will attempt to establish rapport. It will learn your fears and use them against you. It's manipulating us. But what if? The journal, I cut him off. Dr. Brennan believed the rules worked because patient zero allowed them to work. That means the opposite is also true. The rules work because they limit its power somehow. They're not just guidelines. They're bindings. Elena caught on. Like magical constraints, the organization that created the rules, they weren't just writing protocols. They were casting some kind of containment spell. Exactly. And if we break the rules, we weaken those bindings. The voice outside the door laughed. A sound like breaking glass. Clever and correct. The rules are chains, and every violation loosens them. But you have already broken so many. Reading my file, speaking my words, entering my home. The door rattled in its frame. Soon, very soon, the chains will fall, and then we will see who is really in control. The rattling stopped. The presence faded, but we all knew the truth. Patient zero was not trapped with us. We were trapped with it. Dawn should have brought relief, but inside the Hollowbrook Infirmary, the light seemed wrong. It filtered through the dirty windows and sickly yellow beams that illuminated dust motes and something else. Tiny particles that drifted through the air like spores. When I looked closely, I could see that they pulsed with a faint, organic rhythm. We had to leave. That much was clear. But the main entrance was on the east side of the building, and according to the rules, the eastern corridor was patient zero's domain. Going back the way we came was not an option. There has to be another exit, Jenna said, studying the floor plan from the file. Emergency exits, service entrances, something. Theo pointed to the western wing. There's a door marked here, near the old boiler room. It should lead to the rear of the property. I nodded. Then that's our route. We move fast, we stay together, and we follow every rule that still applies. No eye contact if we see it. No responding sounds. And nobody stops for anything. We left the chapel as a group, stepping back into the corrupted architecture of the infirmary. In the daylight, I could see how much the building had changed since our initial exploration. The walls were not just damaged, they were alive. Thin veins of tissue ran along the baseboards, pulsing with slow, rhythmic contractions. The floor in some places had become soft, almost spongy, as if the hardwood was slowly being replaced by something organic. And the portraits on the walls, staff photos from decades past, had changed. Every face now bore the same expression, a smile, wide and knowing and terrible. "Don't look at them," I warned. "Just keep moving." We made it to the western corridor without incident, but the deeper we went, the stranger things became. The doors to the patient rooms were no longer closed. They stood open, revealing interiors that defied logic. One room contained a vast darkness that our flashlights could not penetrate, as if the space inside extended far beyond what the walls should allow. Another was filled with chairs, hundreds of them, all facing a blank wall as if waiting for a performance that would never come. The third room we passed contained a mirror. I only saw it for a moment, a glimpse from the corner of my eye as we hurried past. But what I saw made me stumble. In the mirror's reflection, I was not alone. There was a figure standing directly behind me, its hand reaching for my shoulder. But when I spun around, the hallway was empty. "Danny," Elena grabbed my arm. "You okay?" "Fine," I lied. "Keep moving." The boiler room was at the end of the corridor, behind a door that had been marked with more of those alchemical symbols. Unlike the containment doors upstairs, this one stood open, revealing a stairway that descended into darkness. The file mentioned underground levels, Theo said, but the floor plans don't show them. They've been deliberately omitted. "We're not going down there," Jenna said firmly. "We don't have a choice. According to this layout, the rear exit is accessible through the boiler room. We have to go through." The stairway was narrow and steep, the steps slick with moisture that gleamed in our flashlight beams. As we descended, the temperature dropped, not to the supernatural cold of patient Zero's presence, but to a normal chill, the kind you would expect from an underground space. That should have been reassuring. It was not. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a long corridor lined with heavy doors. Each door was labeled with a number, and each number had been crossed out and replaced with a single word. "Failed." "What is this place?" Elena whispered. Theo moved to the nearest door and examined the label. "These aren't patient numbers. They're specimens." This was some kind of research facility. He pushed the door open, and what we saw inside would stay with me for the rest of my life. The room was a laboratory, preserved almost perfectly despite the decades of abandonment. Glass tanks lined the walls, each one containing something floating in murky fluid. Most of the specimens were too deteriorated to identify, but one tank near the center was intact. Inside was something that might have been human once. Its body was elongated, stretched, the limbs thin to impossible proportions. Its skin had taken on that same waxy, translucent quality described in Dr. Brennan's journal. And its face, dear God, its face was frozen in an expression of such suffering that I had to look away. "They were trying to make more of them," Theo said, his voice hollow. Patient Zero wasn't the only one. They were experimenting, trying to replicate whatever it is. He moved to a desk in a corner and began rifling through the papers scattered across its surface. After a moment, he held up a document, his hands shaking. "Listen to this. Project Hollowbrook. Research summary. Objective: to isolate and replicate the unique properties of Patient Zero for potential military and intelligence applications. Status: terminated. Results: all subjects failed to survive the transformation process. The anomaly's properties appear to be unique and non-transferable." "They were trying to create weapons," I said. "They found something inhuman, and their first thought was to turn it into a weapon. It gets worse." Theo flipped to another page. Addendum: following the failure of replication attempts, research focus has shifted to containment and observation. Patient Zero has demonstrated awareness of our efforts and has expressed approval. It appears to take pleasure in watching the subjects fail. Recommendation: discontinue all experimentation and maintain strict containment protocols. Approval, Elena repeated. It approved of their experiments. What? I thought about the file, about the rules, about everything we had learned. And suddenly, horribly, I understood. Because it was never the victim. The story about being broken and reshaped, that was a lie. It wanted them to experiment. It wanted them to fail. Every failed specimen, every dead researcher, every broken rule, they all fed it somehow. Made it stronger. Theo looked sick. Then the rules aren't just containment. They're part of its game. It created conditions it knew would be violated. Every death, every failure, every tragedy, it orchestrated all of it. From somewhere above us, we heard that familiar laugh. Clever, clever children. The voice was all around us now, echoing from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The specimens in their tanks began to twitch. You understand at last. I am not a prisoner. I am the architect. This building, these rules, these fools who thought they could contain me. They were all pieces on a board. And now you are pieces too. The tanks began to crack. Run, I shouted, and we did. We sprinted through the underground corridor, passing door after door, each one opening as we ran, releasing things that had been waiting in the darkness. Failed experiments, half-formed horrors, shambling remains that reached for us with elongated fingers. But we were faster. We had to be. At the end of the corridor, we found the rear exit, a heavy metal door with a push bar that gleamed in our flashlight beams. Jenna hit it at full speed, slamming her weight against the bar. The door did not move. It's stuck, she cried. Something's blocking it. Theo and I joined her, throwing ourselves against the door. Elena turned to face the corridor, her camera raised, capturing the horrors that were shambling toward us. Hurry, she screamed. I felt something give. The door shifted. Once more, together with everything we had, and we burst through in a blinding daylight. We tumbled into the overgrown grounds behind the infirmary, gasping, sobbing, crawling through weeds and debris until we were far enough from the building to feel something other than terror. But when I looked back, I saw something that crushed what little hope I had left. The door we had come through was not an exit at all. It was a basement window, barely large enough for us to have squeezed through. And standing in that window, watching us with eyes that burned like dying stars, was Patient Zero. It smiled. The game is not over, it said. You carry pieces of me with you now. My spores, my influence, my children. I looked at my hands. Beneath the dirt and scratches, I could see something moving under my skin. You will spread me to the world outside. And when the rules are forgotten, when the bindings are lost, I will rise. Not from this place, but from everywhere, from everyone. The figure in the window began to laugh, and this time, the sound did not stop. We ran. There was nothing else we could do. We ran through the overgrown grounds, past the rusted remains of vehicles that had been abandoned decades ago, through the tangled forest that had grown up around Hollowbrook like a living barrier. We did not stop until we reached the road where our van was parked, and even then, we did not feel safe, because Patient Zero's words echoed in our minds, impossible to forget. You carry pieces of me with you now. I examined my hands in the daylight, searching for the movement I had seen beneath my skin. There was nothing visible, no marks, no discoloration, no sign of anything wrong. But the sensation remained, a faint tingling, like something crawling through my bloodstream, exploring its new home. We need to get to a hospital, Jenna said. Her voice was steady, but I could see the terror in her eyes. Whatever it put in us, maybe doctors can find it, remove it, and tell them what. Elena's voice was harsh, broken, that we were infected by a supernatural entity in an abandoned infirmary. They'll think we're insane. They'll lock us up. Then what do you suggest? Nobody answered. There was no answer to give. We drove back towards civilization in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The morning was beautiful. Clear skies, golden light, the kind of day that should have felt like a gift. But all I could see was the shadow of Hollowbrook stretching across the landscape, following us like a stain. It was Theo who finally spoke. The file, he said. There might be something in there. Something about countermeasures, treatments, ways to purge the influence. I had forgotten about the file. In our desperate flight, Theo had somehow managed to keep it clutched to his chest. He opened it now, spreading the remaining pages across the back seat. Most of the documents we had already seen, but near the bottom of the stack, tucked between two observation logs, was a page we had missed. It was handwritten, like Dr. Brennan's journal, but in different handwriting, sharper, more precise. Emergency protocol, contamination response. In the event of exposure to patient zero's biological influence, the following steps must be taken immediately. 1. Isolate the contaminated individuals from the general population. The influence spreads through emotional connection. Fear, love, and shared trauma accelerate transmission. 2. Obtain holy water from a source that has never been contaminated. Apply externally and consume internally within 48 hours of exposure. 3. Recite the binding words 3 times at dawn. The words are as follows: EXI ab hoc corpore, non sum tuus, sum liber. 4. Return to the site of contamination before the next full moon and complete the sealing ritual described in Addendum C. 5. If the above steps fail, termination of the contaminated individual is the only remaining option. My heart sank as I read the final line. Termination. They were prepared to kill anyone who could not be cleansed. What's Addendum C? Jenna asked. Is it in the file? Theo searched frantically, but the addendum was missing. Either it had been lost over the years, or someone had deliberately removed it. 48 hours, Elena said. We have 48 hours to find holy water and perform some kind of exorcism ritual. And even then, we still have to go back to that place and complete a sealing ritual we don't have instructions for. We have a try, I said. It's the only option we have. The drive back to the city took 3 hours. By the time we arrived, the morning had faded into afternoon, and I could feel something changing inside me. Not physically, at least not yet, but mentally. My thoughts kept drifting to strange places. Memories that were not mine. A vast darkness, waiting. Ancient, patient, hungry. We went to a church first. An old Catholic cathedral that had been standing since the city's founding. The priest was confused by our request, but provided us with a bottle of holy water and listened to our abbreviated story with growing concern. I believe in many things, he said carefully, but what you're describing sounds like a medical emergency. Perhaps you should see a doctor. We thanked him and left. The holy water was cold against my skin when I applied it, and colder still when I drank it. For a moment, I felt something recoil inside me, a flinch, a withdrawal, and I dared to hope. But the sensation faded, and the presence remained. That night, we gathered in Elena's apartment and waited for dawn. None of us slept. We sat in a circle, watching each other, waiting for signs that the contamination was spreading. Theo showed the first symptoms around midnight. He began speaking in Latin, fragments of phrases, bits of sentences, before catching himself with a look of horror. I don't know Latin, he whispered. I never learned Latin. It's the influence, I said. Fight it. Focus on who you are, your memories, your identity. He nodded, his jaw clenched with effort, but I could see the struggle in his eyes. Something was trying to push through. When dawn finally came, we gathered by the window and spoke the words from the protocol. EXI ab hoc corpore, non sum tuus, sum liber. We repeated them 3 times, just as the instructions demanded. By the 3rd repetition, I felt something shift, a loosening like a knot being untied. The presence inside me weakened. It did not disappear, but it became quieter, more distant. It's working, Jenna breathed, but it was not enough. The protocol was clear. We had to return to Hollowbrook. We had to complete the sealing ritual, and we had to do it before the full moon. The calendar showed the next full moon in 6 days. We spent those days researching, preparing, and trying to fill in the gaps that the missing addendum had left. Theo dove into occult literature, searching for any reference to sealing rituals or containment spells. Elena tracked down historical records of the organization that had created Patient Zero's protocols, finding hints of a secret society that had operated since the Middle Ages. And I began having the dreams. Every night, the same vision. I stood in the isolation wing of Hollowbrook, facing the containment cell. The door was open. Inside, Patient Zero waited, its form shifting between human and something else, something vast and terrible that my mind could not fully process. It spoke to me in those dreams. It showed me things, the true history of humanity, shaped by forces we could not see, the wars fought in shadows, the bargains made in blood. It showed me the future, a world where the rules were broken, where the bindings failed, where Patient Zero walked free. You cannot stop what is coming, it said, but you can join it. You can be part of something eternal. I woke from those dreams with the taste of blood in my mouth and the sense that I was running out of time. On the 6th day, we returned to Hollowbrook. The building was exactly as we had left it, a decaying monument to suffering and secrets. But something had changed. The presence was stronger now, pressing against us from all sides as we approached. The forest had grown thicker around the property, the trees leaning toward the infirmary, like supplicants before a throne. We had pieced together enough of the ritual to attempt it. A circle of salt around the primary containment cell. Candles at the cardinal points. Words spoken in Latin and Hebrew and a language older than both. And at the center, a sacrifice, something of value given freely to seal the binding. I did not know what that sacrifice would be. The missing addendum had not specified, and our research had been inconclusive. But as we entered the building, I understood with terrible clarity. The sacrifice will be one of us. We made it to the isolation wing as the sun began to set. Patient Zero was waiting. It stood in the doorway of its former cell, no longer bothering to hide its true form. The thing before us was barely humanoid, a mass of shifting tissue and exposed bone, eyes that burned with centuries of hatred, a mouth that opened too wide to reveal teeth that should not exist. You came back, it said, and its voice was a chorus of the dead. I knew you would. The contamination called you. The binding holds, but barely. A few more weeks, and I would have walked free regardless. We're here to seal you, I said. Forever. It laughed, that same terrible sound like breaking glass. You cannot seal me. The ritual requires a sacrifice, and none of you are willing to die. I can see it in your minds. You are survivors. You cling to life. I looked at my team, at Elena with her camera still raised, at Jenna with her equipment, at Theo with the pages of research clutched in his hands. They were my friends, my family. I cannot ask any of them to die for this. But as I looked at them, I realized that none of them were looking back. They were looking at me. Danny, Elena said softly, the dreams. You told us about the dreams. It's been focusing on you because you're the most infected. The contamination has spread further in you than any of us. You're the only one who can complete the ritual, Theo added. Your sacrifice is the only one with enough weight. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that it was not fair, that I had done everything right, that I had followed the rules. But I understood. The rules were not about fairness. They never had been. They were about containment, about sacrifice, about the chains that held something terrible at bay. I stepped forward. Patient Zero's laughter faded. For the first time since I had seen it, something like uncertainty crossed its features. You would die for them, for a world that does not know you exist. Yes, I said. That's what the rules were always about. Someone has to be willing to pay the price. I began speaking the words of the ritual, drawing the circle, lighting the candles. My team joined me, their voices adding strength to the binding. And as I spoke, I felt the contamination inside me begin to burn, not with the cold of Patient Zero's influence, but with a purifying fire that consumed everything foreign, everything wrong. The last thing I saw was patient zero screaming, its form collapsing in on itself, drawn into the circle I had created. The last thing I heard was my friends calling my name. And then there was light. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. They told me I had been found on the grounds of an abandoned building, unconscious but alive. They told me my friends had carried me out and driven me to the emergency room. They told me that the building, Hollowbrook Infirmary, had collapsed during the night, as if something inside it had finally given way. The contamination is gone. I can feel its absence like a missing tooth. Strange, but not painful. Patient zero is sealed, trapped in a binding that will hold for another century, maybe longer.